Hey everybody, Guy here from Chit Chat. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. This little community here continues to grow, and that's because of you. Thanks so much for listening and bringing us along while you fold laundry and drive to work or work out at the gym or whatever else you're doing. We really appreciate it. Really neat conversation today. Jed Meyer, who is the president and CEO of St. Cloud Financial Credit Union, and we talked all about what is a credit union. If you don't know what a credit union is or how it's different than a bank or how it's similar than a bank, we talk about some of that today. And then we also talked about a really neat thing that they have started called the Tri-Unity Fund. And I won't tell you a ton about what that is. You should listen here now. But super neat what they're doing and how they're helping meet real tangible needs for people in our community. It was a really fun podcast, and I'm excited for you to hear it now. Thanks for listening. Jed, thanks for coming and joining us on the podcast. Really appreciate having you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Jed, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, where you're from, and what do you do for work?
Yeah, so my name's Jed Meyer. We've lived in the community for about 11 years. We moved up here for the job originally from the Twin Cities area, and I'm currently the president and CEO of St. Cloud Financial Credit Union.
Cool. One of the things that I'm kind of interested, I'd like to talk to you about. Everybody engages with banking, in some kind of way. I mean, there are very few people in the world who can just write a check for anything and everything that they want. And so you're going to have some kind of relationship for your car, for your house, or, something. But then even just like where we actually do our banking. So everybody has some kind of relationship with banking. Large chunk of that is local banking. But you are the president of a credit union. And I think a lot of people maybe don't understand or know the differences of like, what is a credit union? I see that thing up on the, I think that's just a bank, right? That's just a bank. Would you just maybe tell us a little bit about, maybe highlight some of the things that are different about credit unions, and then maybe what some of the value is that you think credit unions offer that maybe a bank doesn't?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'll do is start more with the similarities. So
Okay.
we are just like a bank,
Yep.
and we can do anything that a bank does. I think that's one of the first things that people misinterpret of, oh, you have to be, some sort of special union, or is that a union, or do they do all the financial transactions, things that I need? And so, yes, we are just like a bank. And really the structure difference is if you think of the for-profit structure of a business, right? You ultimately have an owner who ultimately provides a service and makes a profit, and ultimately that goes back to them. You also have a nonprofit world, which ultimately is about gaining donations and ultimately giving back for the good of the community. We're actually a not-for-profit, so we're kind of in the middle of that, and that's not talked about. We're actually a cooperative, right? And so the biggest difference between a bank or a community bank and a credit union is that we're actually owned by our members. And so to actually be a member there, you do have to qualify. It's pretty easy to do. For us, it's anybody within the 7-county area that lives, works, or worships. That's who we can serve, which is limiting on some portions, because if somebody calls me from the Twin Cities or Iowa, we can't actually allow them to bank with us because you actually have to qualify to bank with us because we're a community-focused financial institution. But once you do that, you keep $5 in a share account, and that's your actual share of the account. And so that's the biggest difference, is that you're owned by our members who utilize our services. And the advantage of that is that ultimately my bosses are actually 7 elected volunteer board members who are actually members of the credit union. So one day, if you became a member of our credit union, get your auto loans, and if you wanted to become my boss, you could actually do that. And so the advantage there is ultimately we're serving the owners of the company in every transaction that we do. And that's one of the biggest differences, and one of the reasons why I think a lot of people love banking with credit unions.
You guys serve, and you guys have chosen 7 counties, but a credit union could be for any kind of group?
Yeah, they have to be created and they have to be approved,
Yep.
right? And so
And
actually...
who does that approval process?
Right. So
Is that the state?
everybody's heard about the yes and no, but so let's start maybe a little bit bigger. So you've heard of the FDIC, right?
Yep.
That's the insurance fund for community banks and large banks. Ours is called the NCOA. They're the same type organization, just separate. So that's our actual federal regulator and our insurer, who insures the deposits same as they do at any other bank. You can actually then be a federally chartered credit union directly through them, through the NCOA, or you could be like us, who are a state chartered credit union through the Department of Commerce with the state of Minnesota. And so there are different structures for that and how you can do that. We actually started in the 1930. And we were started by postal employees in St. Cloud. So a group of postal employees got together, got a charter approved. They took their money, they put it all in the middle and said, hey, we want all of our money to go back to our group only and benefit in any profit we make off of each other. And so if I need to make interest on my money and someone else needs a loan, we're going to ultimately create that system and ultimately serve one another, rather than someone else who actually isn't involved in the transaction and actually makes a profit off that transaction. And that's really how we started. We moved from serving postal employees to serving federal employees in a 3-county area. And then over the years, we actually became open to anybody that lives, works, or worships in 3 counties. And then about 5 years ago, we moved to 7 counties.
What is that? What is the process like for changing a charter like that? It seems like it's probably a big deal.
Yeah, it's actually pretty in depth. Obviously, from the criteria, we actually have to prove that we have a contiguous group, right? And just counties is not actually a definition that's success. So that's actually the easiest way for us to explain it. But really, if you look at the 7 counties, they're actually connected in other ways. And so the hospital systems and the 911 systems and those areas of operation are contiguous in a way that is beyond just geographical location wise. And so it typically has to be, if you think about postal employees, that's pretty defined. That's pretty easy. And then moving to federal employees like the VA and other people, that's pretty defined. When you move to more of an open charter where it's live, work, or worship, you actually have to show, hey, library system and healthcare system. And all of these things are ultimately connected. And that's why we believe from serving that community makes a lot of sense. And then we have to go through the approval process, both through with the state as well as the NCOA, for them to actually approve that charter for us to be able to serve that area of membership.
Interesting. What are some other common types of charters?
Ultimately, you have niche charters, which ultimately would be more what I would call a seg base, so based on a specific company, because that's another way you can ultimately do it. If you have a large company that has 5,000 employees and they want to create their own credit union for their employees, run by their employees, owned by their employees, where they ultimately create that, you can do that. And some credit unions still to this day operate really working with one large organization. The other way ultimately is, like we said, is where you look at a group of employees that may have multiple locations, or it could be a industry-based type. We serve first responders in this area. And then ultimately, there's the open charter. So there's not a ton of them, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you are either connected directly to a business or a specific group of people. And if you are moving more to an open charter, you actually have, again, as I said before, create a contiguous definition of why.
And prove it.
Like, what's the sense of that community? Why does that make sense? Of, like, you can't say that we believe that people in St. Cloud are the exact same as Rochester. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But even St. Cloud to Maple Grove, like would that make sense, right? Is that really the same community, or is it not the same community? And so those are the things that they're looking for to say, how does that work? And that's why you focus on things like 911 and state patrol and library systems and some of those things. And really for our area, if you look at kind of our counties, if you look at St. Cloud from a kind of infrastructure perspective or a contiguous community perspective, we go really far west and southwest, pretty far north, and not very far east, right? Like, or very far south, right? Like, so you get to Monticello, it's 50-50. People are going to the cities or they're coming here, right? You can go all the way to Wilmer, however, and if someone's not going to shop in Wilmer, they oftentimes would come here versus go to the Twin Cities, where if you're in Cambridge, you're probably going to the cities. And so those are the things they're looking at of, like, what makes the community. And again, it's those common things of healthcare systems and some of those things.
Are there religious charters? Like, could you say, like, could some denomination or something say, like, this is a Methodist credit union, and if you are a member at a Methodist church, is there anything like that?
They'll usually allow you to go that granular, right? Because ultimately, like, it's pretty widespread. Then you can serve anybody who says that across the country, right? But can churches create that as relates to their congregation with more of a defined boundary level? Yes, they can do that for sure. Yeah.
Interesting. What about, like, Vikings lovers? Like could you do something like that? Like, if no, because you couldn't.
No, because
anybody.
How do you
could
define
say
it, right? I could be a Redskins fan, and then because I want your interest rate, I can say I'm a Vikings fan today, right? And so there are other ways. Like, you'll see a lot of credit unions who launch foundations who give back to the community. We just launched a brand new one called Tri-Unity Foundation. We're pretty excited about that, and we can get into that a little bit later. Sure. But ultimately, now anybody who makes a donation to that foundation and wants to be a part of that community can also qualify for membership. So there are a few open ways to get there outside of kind of what our primary focus is, but we don't spend a ton of time there. And, we're really trying to be a community-based financial institution. We would love to serve someone who lives out of state or whatnot. And with today's technology, when our members move out of state, they oftentimes stay banking with us, where in the past they didn't. But if you look at the core, function of our business, it's really to be the fabric of the community, create democratic opportunities to capital for starting up businesses and for the local community. That's really our function. Cool. And a really important function. And I think it's something that people have to pay more attention to. One thing that people don't understand, and this goes for community banks as well as credit unions. In the early 90s, there were 20,000 community banks, 20,000 credit unions across the country. Today, there's only about 4,500 of each left.
That's a lot of attrition.
A lot of attrition. And we're, I would think both industries, they're very similar lines of decline. Those go through mergers, purchases, and some of those things. But, it really is about similar for credit unions and community banks. And the problem with that is then, you're starting to lose that local economy, right? How do local economies help entrepreneurs, move in and start businesses? And how do you keep your local economy resilient when things happen as we become more of a connected world? And on the global side of things, ultimately things that happen halfway around the world impact us today more than they did 25 years ago. Well, as you start moving into more connected currencies, as we've seen in the blockchain and crypto and some of those areas that are a little bit more global, right?
Fluid.
Local financial institutions are really going to have even more pressure than they've had in the past. And I think communities need to wake up and pay attention to that so that they understand how important local financial institutions to keep it local. And all you have to do is go to rural Minnesota, go to rural America, anywhere, and find a bank that maybe sold and then the branch was closed. It's like, how do you act? Like, how does that feel from not having a local financial and access to capital and some of those things? And so that's where we really get our passion from, is to say, hey, we're going to survive. We're going to continue to focus locally. We don't want to be in 85 different places around the state, or, ultimately, 15 different states. We really want to serve this community. Maybe we'll continue to expand because we have to continue to do that to survive long term. But this year, we consolidated about little over 4% as an industry. Next year is predicted to be about 5%. And then you start throwing things like blockchain technology and some of the other new technology that's coming into the arena. That makes it really hard. And people ask why. Like, why is that so hard for financial institutions? And the easiest way for me to explain it in the most simple way is to say, if you're a multi-billion-dollar financial institution, and myself, who's much, much smaller than that, if we go buy a piece of technology that our members expect, and today's consumers want it all. They want the ability and the convenience and the opportunities and the apps and all the things that happen. It costs us the same amount of money, right? Or very similar amounts of money, which might be a year or 2 years worth of what my revenue might be versus maybe a month or two of what theirs is. And that's where the actual mergers and consolidations and the larger institutions from a scalability perspective, really why that consolidation is happening.
Okay, so one of the things that I had heard maybe about credit unions is in relationship to these business owners that had started businesses in the cannabis space. Federally, it's illegal, but if a specific state had already legalized it, that they needed to be at a credit union, because if they were in an FDIC insured bank, that their assets could be seized because it was federally illegal, even though it was legal in the state. And so they had to come to a bank that was insured by the
NCUA.
NCUA. Is that true?
Semi-accurate there.
Okay.
What I would say is ultimately, from a legal perspective, you have states and state laws and state charters. So ultimately, if you're a state chartered financial institutions, you're under the Department of Commerce. And ultimately, Department of Commerce is going to follow the state rules.
Right.
Does not mean you're absolved from federal law either. So there's still a lot of credit unions who ultimately, if it's legal in their state and the Department of Commerce is moving that direction, they're still ultimately saying, hey, we're not ready for that. We're not ready to go down that path, and we don't know where this is going. And obviously, there's a lot of infrastructure and there's a lot of compliance in that world, obviously, as you can imagine, from movement of money and where the size of the transactions and some of the things that are happening there. Obviously in the state of Minnesota, it's a place that's starting to evolve, or ultimately just went through the lottery in the cannabis space of really that industry starting to take off. We made the decision about a year ago to start getting into that space, studying it, learning about it. And we actually have found ourselves in a place of, kind of being one of the first in Minnesota, of a handful that have been willing to do this. And really, it's been an interesting space because, even in the lottery system at the state of Minnesota, you actually had to have a financial institution for your application, even whether you're doing banking with them or not. And we really looked at it as, hey, this isn't anything other than saying we need to meet our members where they're at. And we would say the same thing in cryptocurrency, right? Like, people don't understand about cryptocurrency, what is it actually is. There's very few currencies. Bitcoin's one of them. Most of crypto is a technology investment, right? Like, they're technology companies. We also made the choice to be in that space and ultimately, because we want to be a survivor in a community long term and be viable as these things become material in our community. Well, let me tell the story this way. When I sit across from my desk, I always assume, hey, ultimately the members are my boss. And I have to assume the member in my left chair loves everything I'm doing. And the member in my right chair doesn't like anything that I'm doing. But I have to have an answer for both because they actually are owners of the company. And so when you do that, when things become material, whether that be cannabis and the member on the left says, yes, you should serve the community, and the member on the right says, I don't believe in that. And ultimately the answer to the member on the right is, hey, we're meeting our members where they're at. You don't have to participate in it. We're not taking any of your funds, investing in that area or doing any of those things. We're just trying to serve the community in a different way. And we would say the same thing about crypto and saying, we're trying to meet our members where they're at. That's one of the advantages of being small, is we actually have a very strong connection with our members. I know everybody kind of says that, but I'll give you one example. We'll send out 18,500 emails in an annual survey to our members, and we'll get almost 2,300 responses. And so that's
in case you're listening, that's a huge percentage.
Yeah, that's huge,
that's
right?
Wonderful.
That's very validated information, and so we have a unique advantage of being small enough to have that connection with our members, for them to tell us when it's become material. And in the crypto space, I would tell you over the last 4 years of actually doing these surveys, we've actually found at the lowest it was about 16% of our members are in the space or want to be in this space within 2 years. And that was right after the FTX collapse. And then ultimately up to 25% of them want to do that. And so we said, hey, this is material enough. We need to create options for them. We don't love the FTXs of the world, or not to bash any companies, but really any of those type wallets that ultimately are a little unregulated. How do we provide an opportunity for our members? We'll be launching the first in the nation digital asset vault created by us over the last 5 years, which will basically just be easiest, simplest way to say it is a virtual safe deposit box for people to store those assets so that they don't keep them in a wallet where they actually still are exposed to some of the risks that we've seen in that market over time.
Is it material or not? 25% of your people asking for something especially something that's so new, that feels really material. It seems smart that you guys are responding in some kind of way or not. I haven't personally jumped into crypto, in part because I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I have friends, and there are people that I know that are really into it and have done it well. And for me at this point, and I might kick myself someday that I haven't jumped in yet, but I just don't understand it. And what I do know is I know our businesses. And so I just am I think I'm going to invest in what we're doing because I understand that thing. But then I see, I have friends that are actively involved in it. And for them, it seems like a really great fit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misnomers about that industry. I think if you really study it like we have, and by the way, I also am not into crypto. So I think that's important for people to hear from me of, hey, we're creating things because our members are asking for it. We've done
not
the
because
research.
It's some pet project.
Not because, or it's something that I think I'm really into or any of those things. I also will kick myself someday because the more I've learned about it is, and we could do a whole another podcast on this, and maybe we should someday, but it's a currency that's created through adoption and supply and demand. And it's to a place where it doesn't have the ability for really outside influence of a government or someone else to manipulate. And that's really the reason it was created. And now it's become to an adoption level where, if you pay attention, the narrative has really changed in the last 2 years. And we saw that coming as we move forward. And whether, we're a credit union, right? So we used to store gold bars behind steel cages. Right. And so I look at it from, okay, if our members believe it's an asset as it becomes material, we ultimately, that's the role we've played in this community. We need to be serious about it and do some research and kind of work through that. And so, it's a place that I think that people should learn more about it. I would throw a plug into something. So when we started this strategy, I found the same thing of where do I actually go to get really good information from this, right? So we studied and we found people out there, consultants. We interviewed a bunch of them. We brought them in. We've done training internally, externally for my board. But then we ultimately said our first step in the strategy is we need to create education for our community. Yeah. And so we said, who in our community actually looks to be, most of them self-taught, right? But we went out and we searched and we found a group of people who also had similar aspirations. And together we created a nonprofit called the Minnesota Crypto Council. And the Minnesota Crypto Council was started 2.5 years ago. On a quarterly basis, they do training or education seminars, whether it be coffee or movies at St. Cloud State. And they've been doing that now for 2.5 years for our community. It's free. Cool. Anybody can go there, learn more about it if you're interested in that space. And it's just a service that we were trying to give back to our community.
If somebody did want to learn more more, where can they find information about that? Is that on your website?
I'm not sure if we have that on our website, but I can get that to you maybe for after this, and can
Yeah.
scroll it on the bottom here
Yeah.
of their
In the
website.
notes.
So,
Great.
yeah.
Cool. All right. A little earlier, you had mentioned your foundation. We just tell us a little bit more about the foundation you guys started.
Yeah, and so Triunity Foundation is something that we've been working on for a long time now, and really, what the unique business model that it's set for is our goal is to end the strain of terminal debt in this country. So anybody faced with a terminal illness, we actually want to end the strain of that. And because as we dove further into this, we as credit unions, community banks too, again, I know that people always think we compete, and we think we compete all the time, but I think they're as important as we are. I wish them success. We have different business models.
Yeah.
We all give back to the community. We do good things. And that's how I look at it. Of course, we compete when we have to. And I always say compete when you have to, collaborate when you can. And,
I love that.
And that's what we do. And but if you really look at we'll do anything and everything for our members when they're faced with a terminal illness, right? So will community banks. We have a little luxury because they're our owners, so we can go a little bit further maybe than some others can. But we ultimately will hit, basically the regulatory compliance around bad debt, right? Like we can't just forgive the loan because that's not fair to our other members.
Yep.
We'll run into IRS self-dealing rules. And so those are things that limit us at some point. And so years ago, this was challenged to a room I was in by at a conference. It basically said, hey, I'm surrounded by executives in a credit union space who care about people helping people. They're owned by their members. Can someone in here help me solve how to end terminal debt in this country? And I remember getting goosebumps writing it down, and I didn't really do anything with it. But as we worked through it through the years and looking for different ways to serve our community, what we said was, what if we looked at this more from a national level? We're going to serve our community as well. How do we get to a place where we can actually have our primary people who will use this foundation from a funding perspective to be credit unions and eventually community banks, right? So if a credit union can say, we're going to give you restricted funds to your community, we're going to go out to our membership, to our community and say, if you're facing a terminal illness, you can apply for grants here. We know that money is going to go back to that credit union, back to their balance sheet, back to their community, or back to their members paying off medical debt. Why wouldn't they want to be able to do that? Because then you're not talking about the regulatory issues and some of those things. And so really creating that fiduciary type foundation that credit unions can participate in, where we can actually end terminal debt in this country at some point. That's our biggest dream. Actually created the foundation about a year and a half ago. We ran our first pilot this year where we partnered with a credit union in the Twin Cities, one out of Wisconsin, one out of Kansas City, including ourselves, where we gave away $50,000 to people facing terminal illness. You can go to the Triunity Foundation's website. You can look at the videos and some of the impact and the stories. The whole point of that was for us to test our model, to work through it, and then ultimately we're going live in 25. And so we'll be looking from our credit union and community banks who want to bring this to their community, utilizing our foundation. It's not called the St. Cloud Financial Foundation. It is technically, but we created the Triunity Foundation because I would love for other banks in this community to say, hey, we want to partner with Triunity, and we don't have to brand one of our competitors, right? And because this is more about how do you impact community, how do you help people with terminal illness, and when people what we've learned through this process, when people are faced with terminal illness, the number of times they make a financial decision versus a healthcare decision is actually way more than I thought ever. I knew of course, all of us can get there from a logical perspective of saying, yes, of course, finances become part of your decision-making process, but the number of people who actually make a financial decision, and so if you put yourself into that shoes of one of the worst seasons of your life, facing terminal illness, and your prognosis is we're not sure. They don't give percentages as much anymore. But hey, if we do treatment, this is what's going to happen. It may or may not help, but it's going to bankrupt your family in the process. There's a lot of people who just say, no, thank you. Or if they say yes, they say, hey, my significant other or someone in my family might have to work extra jobs to help pay for it, where I'm not going to get to see them. I'm going to be sick during that time. Or I'll take 4 of the 12 pills I'm supposed to take, or just diving into this and then ultimately seeing that we have a lot of stats here, but I believe one of them was 75% of people who have a curable form of breast cancer and are of a minority ethnicity will also lose their home. It's like it's so high of the number of people who are impacted by this. And from a financial perspective, people don't understand that when we don't get paid back on stuff, nobody wins. Like I don't want someone's car back. I don't want their house. I want them to have the house. I want them to have their car. Nobody wins in those situations. So how do we create a bridge there to say, hey, if you're faced with terminal illness, we're going to help you get through that. We want more people to choose treatment. We want more people to actually spend quality time with their families and not work 3 jobs while they're going through that. That was the whole kind of really the catalyst to starting this foundation.
cool.
And we're just getting started, and we're excited about where it'll go.
When in 2025 do you think it'll go live?
We will ultimately go live. What we say by going live ultimately for us is we'll start approaching other financial institutions. We've tested our model. Like I said, we've already given away our first level of grants. We will give away our next set of grants in the summer of 2025, and then a second round in the December, fall, probably fourth quarter of 2025.
Long term, what do you think the main way that the program would be funded is?
I actually think the main way that it'll be funded initially will be through financial institutions. And again, that's the business model that's really exciting to me. And that's why I wanted to ultimately create it from that way. And we're not just looking, anybody can donate. And by the way, you don't have to be a member of the credit union, anybody, it's an open foundation, right? People can apply for this who need help. But having a business model where ultimately you have a source of funding that's not based on people who have experienced it themselves and are giving it out of the kindness of their heart or whatnot, or feel guilty because they haven't done something, recently for somewhere. Of course, we want anybody who is willing to donate, but having an actual funding mechanism that actually can match donations, can do things in the future, that's what's so exciting for us. And then we believe once we get the data, right? And so if I can start showing data back to those financial institutions that, hey, actually it impacted your balance sheet positively too. So forget about all the great things you did about the human being, which should be enough in and of itself. It's actually a financial benefit for participating. And we can get the actual data on the number of people who choose treatment. So for the medical side of the industry of saying, hey, we actually are a catalyst to more people using and choosing treatment. And that's where we've gotten different people to join us. I don't think he would mind, but Dr. Hilary Furo, one of the Coburg Cancer Center leaders here in town, really when I sat down with him and said, hey, would you be a part of this? One of the first things he said before I asked him was, I'm really busy. I'm here as a favor to someone that we mutually know. And I want to hear what you have to say and I want to support it, but I'm really busy. And I don't know that I'll have time. Within 10 minutes of me talking to him about our Tri-Unity Foundation, he said, I'm in. And he's really been stretched for time too. I'm not saying that, but I paused the conversation at that moment. I said, Dr. Gafiro, like why? Why were you in when 10 minutes ago you were trying to really set the stage that you're going to tell me no at this end of the conversation, which would have been fine as well. And he just said, you're scratching the surface of the need of the number of people who are actually impacted like this. And so we actually created an advisory council for our board that's made up of people from the community. We have social workers on that community, on that foundation. We have State Rep Bernie Perriman's on there, who's also a cancer survivor. And we have Melinda Gao, who ultimately is known in the community and really helps give back to our community in so many ways. We have Tom Hool, who's out of the Twin Cities, who also had a son die of terminal illness. My point is we created an advisory council. And the cool part about that advisory council is they make 100% of the grant decisions. They have a strategy and there's a scoring matrix, and we go through all the logistical things of making sure that we're giving the money away, preventing fraud, and doing it in a very equitable way and in a methodical way, right? But the people making the decisions, including the social workers who work with patients like this every day, we felt it was really important that we had, doctors on that team, Dr. Yafiro on that team. We just added another doctor to that team and really build the team of people who actually are awarding these grants are not me and my team.
Right.
It's actually people who are familiar with this. They're going to make the decisions based on their actual depth of experience. And so, we're excited about it. We have big dreams.
That's cool.
But the good news is I don't know if you've ever heard the starfish story. Starfish story is basically a beach full of starfish. Somebody throws one back in. Somebody says to him, hey, you can't like save them all.
Why'd you
what are
do
you
that?
doing? And he picked up another one, threw it back in, said, we helped that one. And that's really our goal of saying, hey, we have big dreams of having this go to a lot of financial institutions across the country. At the same time, we've already helped 11 people and made a significant impact. And so we've already won. We're going to continue down this method of trying to provide this and make this an opportunity for other people, both in the St. Cloud community, across the state, and ultimately across the nation. So,
if you let the national or the global crisis of that, if you let that determine whether or not you would jump in and get involved, you could be just overrun with crippling fear about, or just being overwhelmed. But if you ask those 11 people, Like, was it good that this was started? Were you helped by that? You're going to get a resounding yes from those 11 people if you've actually made a difference. So very, very cool.
I would encourage anybody to go out and look at those videos because you don't need me to confirm what you just said.
Yeah.
When you see the responses and the impact, and we're not talking about just thank you. It's really about relief. It's about people at their toughest time. It's about connection, human connection, which is something that it's actually what we say why we exist is to create human connection and meaningful difference for people. And banking is just what we do, but that's why we do it. And when you see that, it and you can see it in their eyes of, hey, we actually made a difference there. And it's like any gift, right? Like, you were probably taught like I was at a young age of like, hey, when great grandma who has a ton of grandkids gives you a pair of socks for Christmas, it's more about the gesture than it is about the socks, right? Like, it's very important for us to understand, like, it's not the dollar amount that we're giving. We're hoping to be able to do more in the future. It's really about, hey, you literally allowed myself to breathe for at least the next few months. That was one of our first videos, so where that was actually in the video, and ultimately one of our first grant recipients has already passed, unfortunately. But really knowing that we were able to provide that last kind of month of their world, and just a relief of stress. Hopefully that created more quality time for them to focus on what's more important in life, which is each other.
Yeah, it's really special.
Yeah.
And I can confirm how great Dr. Ufero is. This past year, my wife walked through a really challenging health thing. I mean, there were lots of bright spots, in a really kind of like challenging season for us. He was one of the very brightest spots. It was like hard to understand all of the medical terms. And at one point, he just pulled out a notepad and he just like sketched for us. I had never seen this kind of thing. He just sketched for us the different, like to explain it, he like just sketched and gave us numbers and stuff and let us take these little papers home, almost like cheat sheets. Because like when someone explains something to you, you're like, okay, yeah, I think I get it. And then you walk out of there and you're like, wait, did I get it? And just the way that he like held our hand, he knew we'd need some references later. And he slowly and methodically and with great kindness helped us understand what we were kind of up against. It was so unbelievably refreshing. So well done on getting such a kind of a great resource on your team and community there.
I love that. And ultimately, just on that note, like we're talking about Central Minnesota, the St. Cloud community, right? Like one of the coolest things about moving here is, when you didn't live here, I didn't grow up here. My perception of St. Cloud was not what it actually is. It's a very tight-knit community. There are amazing innovations happening here, but more importantly, there are amazing people who care and they give back. They don't ask for anything in return. It's actually a program that we created years ago. We'll get it back up and running next year with St. Cloud Live. I used to be with a different paper in town. And really our whole goal of that program was called Changemakers. And really what I pitched back then was there's so much negative news in the world. Can we go out and find the hidden gems in our community, people who want no recognition? And anyways, long story is we actually created a program where they would solicit nominations to nominate a change maker, tell us the story. They would do a human interest story on the paper and online. We would show up and give them a plaque and $500 towards whatever they did to help the community, and there would be awards. That then quickly evolved into now there's 3 like annual winners at a big event where we had a ton of people coming. But it really is about focusing on like there's so much goodness that we don't talk about enough. And it's a really cool community to live in, to work in, and to be a part of. And we don't share that enough because when you talk about Dr. Hilary DeFiro, you're spot on. He's just a great human being, super smart, loves his work, and is really compassionate about caring for other people. And that's ultimately who I get to work with all the time, both in my credit union, but I get to run into them in our community all the time.
Well, sweet. Jed, I'm so thankful. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast and hearing more about what you're doing at the bank and also at Tri-Unity Foundation. Very cool, very exciting. I hope you keep throwing starfish back in the ocean. Jed, as we close, we always do something called the unpaid ad. Is there someone, something, or some idea that you think deserves a plug today?
That's a great question. I love that thought process. Let me just maybe say this. The ad I would love to do is, hey, can you become a change maker today on the smallest level? Whether it be an act of kindness, whether it be $5, pay it forward. We see those things all the time, but they make a difference. Like you can make a difference in someone's life with the smallest act of kindness, the smallest gesture, the smallest help, holding the door, paying for their coffee, doing something. So I would just challenge anybody listening to this podcast, go out, be a change maker today. And if enough of you say yes to that, we'll actually have an amazing kind of momentum moving forward into the new year of 2025, where we can find ways to come together more as community, as there's so many things in the world that are trying to separate us, but we have way more in common. We do care about people. People care about other people. And that's kind of small act, I think, can kind of be maybe the spark that lights a fire of goodness and kindness in our community.
Wonderful. My unpaid ad for the day is for the Youth Chorale of Central Minnesota. I just went. My daughter's in the Cantabile Girls Choir, and we just went to a concert, and it was so sweet and so lovely. And I think that more people should go and listen to all these sweet little young things singing and kind of pouring their heart into that. It was really special and really, really fun.
Love it.
Well, sweet. Jed, thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.